Robbie Middleton, better known as Robbie, was born on June 28, 1990, in the small town of Splendora, located in the state of Texas, USA. He grew up in a friendly and caring family consisting of his parents, Bobby and Colleen Middleton, and his older sister, Heather. The Middletons lived in a small village where almost all the residents knew each other. Robbie was a cheerful, amiable, and extremely inquisitive boy. Like most of his peers, he loved playing outdoors, but Robbie's favorite activity was camping. He had dreamed of having his own tent for a long time, and so when the boy turned 8, his parents decided to make this dream come true. This day was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, but unfortunately, the exact opposite happened. June 28, 1998, began as the happiest day for all the Middleton family members. As soon as Robbie woke up, his parents showered him with love and presented him with 2 gifts at once, a large box and a small envelope. When the boy opened the box, he could not hide his delight. Robbie instantly realized that inside was the very tent he had been dreaming of for so long. After thanking his parents, he opened the envelope, which contained quite a significant amount of money, at least for an 8-year-old child. A little later, Robbie announced that he wanted to use the tent to celebrate his birthday with his best friend. He asked his parents for permission to set up the tent in the backyard and buy fireworks to set off during the celebration. Not only did his parents agree, but they accompanied him to the shopping center to make purchases. Having bought everything he needed, Robbie waited until evening to go pick up his buddy, who lived in the same village but on the other side of the woods. Although this place was deserted and poorly lit, the boy was used to walking there without fear of getting into trouble. But on this day, everything changed, and he became the victim of an incredibly brutal attack. He was tied to a tree with a fishing net, doused with gasoline, and set on fire. And although Robbie screamed in pain, no one heard his cries for help. Ironically, it was this unbearable pain that kept him from passing out and dying. When the net holding Robbie burned through, he was able to jump away. With his last ounce of strength, he crawled in the direction of the road leading to his house. At that very moment, Robbie's neighbors, who were returning home from work, saw him run out of the woods. At first glance, it seemed to them that the boy's clothes were simply dirty, but when they got closer, they realized that he was not dirty but burned. Robbie looked terrifying. His body was still smoking and reeked of gasoline. His eyes were completely white, his skin had melted, and his eyelashes, lips, hair, and genitals were completely charred. Noticing the plumes of smoke rising above the forest, one of Robbie's neighbors ran there to make sure the fire was not spreading further. About 100 meters from the road, in the thicket, he found the site of the fire. A small tree was almost completely burned by the flames. The ground around it was soaked with gasoline, and there was a smell of fuel in the air. At this time, Robbie kept repeating that he could not see anything, that he was cold and very thirsty. Some of the locals brought him water, a blanket, and ice. Luckily, one of those present had some knowledge of first aid for burns. This person warned the others not to touch Robbie or give him anything to drink, as it could only worsen his already critical condition. While the neighbors were trying to help the boy, his parents were already seriously worried about his absence. Stepping outside the house, they noticed a group of locals gathered at the end of the street, shouting for help. Instinctively running in their direction, they saw a child with severe burns all over his body. Recognizing Robbie's red sneakers, Colleen instantly realized that this burned boy was her son. Everyone began asking Robbie what had happened to him. Was it an accident, or had someone deliberately attacked him? At first, it seemed as if the boy did not know what to answer, but eventually, Robbie said that a teenager named Rex Taylor had splashed gasoline in his face. At this point, the first ambulance arrived at the scene. Soon, Robbie was taken to a small hospital in Houston, but due to the severity of his injuries, he was immediately transferred to a medical center in Galveston. Later, Robbie's parents were told that 99% of his body surface was covered with third-degree burns. Essentially, this information meant that the boy's chances of survival were almost zero. Robbie was immediately sent for surgery, during which most of his burned skin was removed. There, the process of replacing it with skin grown in laboratory conditions began. The only area of the boy's body that remained intact was a small segment on his right leg. It was this segment that specialists used to grow thousands of small patches of skin for further transplantation. Contrary to all pessimistic predictions, Robbie survived, although his existence turned into an endless series of stays in various medical facilities. The investigation into the circumstances of the incident began the very next day. From questioning Robbie's neighbors, it became known that he had named a teenager named Rex as the person who attacked him. However, Rex himself claimed that at the time of the event, he and his friends were swimming in the river. Given that all these young people willingly cooperated with the investigation, the detectives excluded them from the list of suspects due to the lack of leads. The investigation reached a dead end, but soon the police had a new suspect, Donald Wilburn Collins, a 13-year-old teenager with an ambiguous reputation. According to available information, he was born in 1985, and little was known about his parents and childhood. His mother died when he was about 8 years old. After that, he moved in with his father, from whom he apparently adopted such bad habits as smoking and drinking alcohol. When Donald's father was imprisoned, he began to move from one distant relative to another until he was taken in by his uncle and aunt on his mother's side, who lived in the same village as Robbie's family. Donald was primarily known for his cruel treatment of animals and constant bullying of younger children. Perhaps that is why none of the locals allowed their children to play with him. Unlike Robbie, who was adored by everyone around him, Donald had no close relationships with almost anyone. He had no real friends, and he seemed to do nothing but stalk the younger children he envied. Investigators turned their attention to Donald after seeing him comment on the events on television. The teenager gave several spontaneous interviews to 2 different news channels, in which he spoke about how, in his opinion, Rex could have set Robbie on fire. However, while talking to journalists, Donald mentioned such details that only someone who was personally present in the woods at the time of the attack could know. He also let slip that, shortly before, he had played with gasoline and burned his hand. He also said that the incident with Robbie haunted him in his nightmares. On July 31, 1998, in an attempt to advance the investigation, detectives met with Robbie and his mother and recorded their conversation on audio. According to the boy, he did not have time to see the attacker, since he attacked him from behind. Robbie remembered seeing some sort of piece of paper, a canister, and several dogs. In addition, he said that shortly before he was set on fire, he heard the sound of a car door closing. It seemed to him that one of the attackers could have been Donald because he recognized his voice. However, he also mentioned a voice that belonged to an older person. It is worth noting that during the conversation, Robbie was under the influence of a significant amount of pain and sedatives, so his thoughts may not have been clear enough. This meant that his testimony should be treated with caution. However, a few days later, the detective spoke with Robbie's mother again, and she reported that this time her son not only named the attackers but also told some details of what they had done to him. Based on this information, the investigators obtained a warrant for Donald's arrest. During questioning, the teenager confessed that he did participate in the attack on Robbie. Notably, once in a juvenile detention center, he repeatedly threatened other teenagers, promising to burn them the same way as Robbie. Some of them told a child welfare worker about this, who then contacted the detectives to pass on this information. According to the testimony of one of the teenagers, Donald said that he burned Robbie only because he and his uncle had previously persuaded him to have an intimate relationship. Essentially, they were afraid that he might tell his parents about it. According to the same teenager, Donald also said that he found the look in Robbie's eyes funny after he set him on fire. He thought they were about to pop out of their sockets. Despite all this evidence, the prosecution decided to close the case against Donald, and by January 2000, he was free again. Perhaps the main reason for this outcome was Robbie's contradictory statements about the identity of the attacker. Despite all the efforts of his family aimed at establishing justice, the investigation into this case reached a dead end. Over the next 13 years, Robbie's life turned into a continuous struggle. He spent most of his time in medical centers, undergoing surgical interventions and exhausting treatment, during which he had more than 150 operations. But his spirit was never broken. Thanks to the unconditional support of his family members, he became a true symbol of endurance and courage. Moreover, Robbie even managed to return to a normal life and went back to school. True, everything did not turn out as rosy as he had hoped because some classmates immediately began to make fun of his appearance. But thanks to willpower and acceptance of reality, Robbie was able to find many understanding people in his environment. Despite everything he had to go through, he demonstrated incredible bravery every day. In addition, he took care not only of himself. Robbie often met with other victims of similar crimes, becoming a kind of protector for them. He even started a fundraising campaign for research in the field of transplantology. His compassion and dedication served as a constant reminder of the truly important things. Robbie became a true role model for many citizens. Meanwhile, Donald continued his criminal path. In 2001, when he was 16, he was convicted of a crime against the integrity of an 8-year-old child. For this, he spent about 4 years in prison. After that, his life turned into a series of events consisting of regular entries into prison. It is important to note that, in fact, Robbie never had any doubts that it was Donald who was responsible for what happened to him. Perhaps that is why, in 2010, he and his loved ones filed a civil lawsuit, accusing him of attempted murder. And it seemed that the first ray of hope for justice appeared when the Middletons turned to Craig Seco, a civil attorney, for help. He helped them file a lawsuit against Donald. Craig's plan was to obtain a copy of the police report and find legal grounds to reopen the criminal case. Subsequently, he managed to obtain the main materials of the investigation, take the testimony of one of the detectives, and also talk with Robbie's doctors. Unfortunately, while the trial was ongoing, Robbie's condition deteriorated sharply. Although he fought bravely against all the consequences of the attack, by that time, he had already been diagnosed with skin cancer, which ultimately took his life at the end of April 2011. With his last act of courage, he recorded a 27-minute video in which he told the truth about what happened on that fateful day, as well as some other details that he had carefully hidden all this time. Robbie said that a few weeks before the arson, Donald had forcibly taken him to the same place and persuaded him to have an intimate relationship. Robbie claimed that he only agreed to this because he witnessed Donald doing the same to another 8-year-old boy. In addition, he mentioned that on the day Donald set the fire, he imagined that he heard the voice of an adult man, who could have been the attacker's uncle. Having recorded this testimony, Robbie passed away a few days later. Dozens of people came to his funeral to pay tribute to his memory. While Robbie's loved ones mourned the heavy loss, his lawyer continued to participate in the trial, adding new evidence to the case. In early September 2011, Donald, who had recently been serving time in prison, was released again. 3 months later, another civil court hearing was held. After watching the video recorded by Robbie shortly before his death, the jury made a symbolic decision and ordered Donald to pay the boy's family monetary compensation in the amount of $150 billion. This amount became a record for the entire history of civil lawsuits in the United States of America. Although Robbie's parents realized that they would never receive this money, they perceived this decision as the restoration of justice for their son. In addition, financial reward was never their main goal. When the civil process ended, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office announced the resumption of the investigation. It is worth noting that this task was extremely difficult. The new investigation involved more than 200 interviews of potential witnesses, as well as expert opinions from various specialists. During the new investigation, investigators questioned almost all previous witnesses and found those who did not testify in 1998. 2 of these witnesses played a key role in the case. One of them was Donald's cousin. She said that on the night when everything happened, her brother confessed to her that it was he who tied Robbie to a tree with a fishing net, then poured gasoline on him and set him on fire. The witness added that when she told one of their family members about this, he replied that the adults would figure it out themselves. Undoubtedly, this case had many legal nuances, most of which were related to the fact that, at the time of the crime, Donald was only 13 years old. However, absolutely everyone involved in this case was determined to achieve true justice for Robbie and his family and also not allow Donald to remain at large. In 2012, the prosecutor who led the investigation appealed to the district court for permission to try Donald as an adult. Of course, by that time, he was already an adult, but I will remind you again that at the time of the crime, he was under 18 years old. In his official response, the district judge only noted that prosecutors have every right to consider juvenile cases as adults at their own discretion. However, he did not give any specific instructions regarding this case. In the end, the prosecutor decided to seek to bring Donald to justice as an adult in accordance with the law of the state of Texas, adopted in 1999, that is, a year after the attack on Robbie. Prior to this point, the minimum age at which adolescents could be tried as adults was 14, but under the new rules, it was lowered to 10 years. The prosecutor insisted that since Robbie died in 2011, the new rules should apply to Donald. On the other hand, the criminal's lawyer argued that recognizing his client as an adult was illegal because the law changed only a year after the actual attack. In other words, this meant that he should be held liable in accordance with the laws in force in 1998. Several witnesses, who testified that he had personally confessed to committing the crime, attended the hearings on the official recognition of Donald as an adult. As a result, the judge concluded that Donald should be recognized as an adult and given a more severe punishment for the intentional or unintentional murder of Robbie. After this decision, the case was transferred to the district prosecutor's office since it gained considerable publicity, not only in 1998, when the main events took place, but also during the civil process. Donald's defense filed a motion to transfer the trial to another locality. Subsequently, the judge granted this request, explaining his decision by the fact that the wide coverage of the case in the media could affect the impartiality of the jury. As a result, the consideration of the case was transferred to a neighboring district, which created certain logistical difficulties for the prosecution. Most witnesses, there were at least 40 people, were people with low incomes who simply could not afford to take time off from work and also did not have their own transport or funds to cover the costs of living in another city. However, the prosecutors made considerable efforts and eventually managed to ensure that most of the key witnesses were present at the hearings. However, there was another problem. It turned out that about 10 witnesses were people who were in a juvenile detention center with Donald in 1998. At the time of the trial, all of them were still being held in the Texas penitentiary system. Despite all these inconveniences, the trial of Donald started in 2015. Given the overall complexity of the case, the prosecutors decided to deviate from the traditional chronological order of consideration. Instead, they began with the testimony of one of Robbie's doctors, who spoke about his injuries, mental state, and the real causes of death. Since, at the pre-trial hearing, the judge excluded Donald's confession to attacking Robbie from the list of main evidence, the prosecutors were forced to look for other ways to convey to the jury what had actually happened. That is why they used a video recording of Robbie's testimony, which was already of great importance for this case because it confirmed that Donald attacked him, trying to hide another, no less serious crime. In the end, the jury watched the video recording more than once, in which Robbie said that the accused set him on fire sometime after forcing him to have an intimate relationship. It was obvious to the chief prosecutor that Donald set Robbie on fire to hide another crime and prevent the boy from telling anyone about it. Despite the fact that the victim himself claimed that he heard the voice of an adult man during the attack, the investigation did not reveal any evidence of the presence of an outsider. When all 12 jurors carefully watched Robbie's last lifetime testimony, Donald demonstratively turned away from the monitor and became engrossed in reading. His lawyers immediately filed a protest, accusing the prosecutors of deliberately manipulating the emotions of the jury since they could not provide testimony from direct witnesses of the incident. At some point in the process, the prosecution invited the defendant's cousin to the courtroom. The woman said that Donald confessed to her that he had attacked Robbie. In addition, the prosecutors called Donald's former cellmates from the juvenile detention center where he was serving his sentence in 1998 to testify. Each of the witnesses confirmed that the defendant had confessed to them his involvement in the crime. It is worth noting that the prosecution also raised the topic of Donald's other offenses, in particular mentioning the encroachment on the integrity of a 6-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy. On February 9, 2015, a jury of 7 women and 5 men found 29-year-old Donald Wilburn Collins guilty of murder and sentenced him to 40 years in prison. Upon hearing the verdict, the convict showed no emotion. Colleen, the mother of the deceased Robbie, expressed the opinion that her son would have been happy with this result because Donald would no longer be able to harm any child. The woman was called to court even at the stage of determining the sentence so that she could tell about her son and the trials that befell their family over the years. Although this sentence actually guaranteed that Donald would spend a significant part of his life behind bars, Robbie's loved ones considered such a punishment insufficient. On the other hand, the prosecutors and investigators involved in the case were satisfied with the court's decision. Finally, after 17 long years, justice prevailed. Donald's chief defender called the sentence too harsh and filed an appeal against the decision to consider his client's case as an adult, despite the fact that the crime was committed by a minor. The lawyer also insisted that the prosecution was based solely on indirect evidence while there was a lack of physical evidence or testimony confirming the fact of the attack and violence against Robbie. Despite all the arguments and efforts on the part of Donald's defense, 3 appellate courts upheld the conviction. The last such decision was made in October 2017, when the possibilities for appeal within the state were exhausted. It seemed likely that Donald's lawyers would turn to the federal court. However, I could not find confirmation of the fact that a new appeal was filed. Currently, Donald continues to serve his sentence in a maximum security prison in the state of Texas. He will receive the right to parole only in 2053. Undoubtedly, the story of Robbie Middleton is a painful reminder of the cruelty that a person is capable of, as well as the incredible strength of spirit and courage of a little boy who fought to his last breath. Robbie went through hell, striving to return to ordinary life and eventually achieve justice. But what a painful price he had to pay for it. I can't wait to hear your opinions in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. Until next time, friends.